Section 24, Chapter 15, Part 1 of The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Denise Nordell. The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson by DeWitt C. Peters. Section 24, Chapter 15, Part 1. Chapter 15. Kit Carson's last trapping expedition. He embarks in a speculation. His trip to California with a large flock of sheep. The method employed by Mexicans in driving herds and their dexterity. Kit Carson goes to San Francisco. Its wonderful growth. Maxwell joins Kit Carson at Sacramento City. The lucky speculation. The return trip to New Mexico and its adventures. The Mormon delegate to Congress informs Kit Carson of his appointment as Indian agent. Kit Carson enters upon the duties of his office. Bell's fight with the Apaches on Red River. Kit Carson's interview with the same Indians. High-handed measures on the part of the Apaches. Davidson's desperate fight with them. The soldiers defeated with severe loss. Davidson's bravery is unjustly questioned. Kit Carson's opinion of it. The Apaches elated by their victory. Their imitations of the actions of military men. The expedition into the United States, which terminated with the last chapter, proved to be valuable in its results so far as the parties engaged in it were concerned. Kit Carson was once more trying hard to keep quiet in his comfortable home at Rayado, but his restless spirit was not proof against this inactivity. His stay at home therefore was short. The memories of other days came upon him, and he longed once more to enjoy, in company with the friends of his youth, the scenes, excitements, and pleasures of his old life as a trapper. Throughout his eventful life, as the reader has been able clearly to see, Kit Carson seldom spent his time in idle thinking. His thoughts almost invariably take form in actions. This eager longing resulted, therefore, in the forming of a regular trapping expedition after the olden style, shape, etc., which he organized with great care and attention. The members of the party were selected by himself, chiefly with great exclusiveness, and numbers who wished to join the party were refused on account of their inexperience. After a good deal of inquiry, Kit succeeded in collecting 18 of his old companions. No one among them was not entitled to be called a mountaineer. Kit looked upon this party of men with an eye of real affection. The meeting previous to the start was a scene to behold. Such a greeting of old friends, well tried and true, will not soon be again seen on the American continent. The day when men went trapping was "long time ago." Kit Carson, as he stood among this band of friends, the acknowledged leader of the party, every man of whom he knew would have periled his life for either one of the company, felt that, indeed, the days of his youth had returned unto him. Everything preliminary was arranged in the most approved style. When all was complete, Kit Carson, mounted on his magnificent charger Apache, riding to the head of the line, gave the order to march. Kit had put it to a vote, and the result was unanimous, that the expedition should be no boy's play. On the contrary, the boldest and one of the longest of the routes, known to their experienced footsteps, was selected. It comprised many of the mighty rivers of the Rocky Mountains, every one of which was almost a hunting ground by itself. Onward, over the wild and broad plains, this band of stalwart men, brave and kindred spirits, dashed. They soon put many a mile between them and the comfortable firesides at Rayado. But these miles, Kit Carson has often said, were the shortest he ever traveled. The way was beguiled by many a recollection, in which every man present could participate with a relish, keen as disuse alone can render the palate of enjoyment. In a short time, the well-remembered waters of the South Fork of the River Platte were descried. Their practiced eyes soon discovered the oft-noted signs of the beaver. The camp was formed and the traps set. The beaver, so long left to mind their own business, had increased in great numbers. The hunt proved correspondingly successful. The party continued working down this stream, through the plains of Laramie, to the new park, and from thence on to the old park. We cannot follow them through this long and enlivening hunt. They trapped a large number of their old streams until, finally, the expedition was terminated on the Arkansas River. Throughout the whole course, the hunt proved to be very successful. With a large stock of furs, they returned in safety to Rayado, via the Raton Mountains, which are spurs of the great Rocky chain. The fact that most of the old trappers had given up their vocation furnishes the reason why the beaver were found, along the entire route, to be so plentiful. We desire that the reader shall paint for himself the enjoyment which these men gathered in this renewal of a pursuit rendered congenial by the experience of long years of activity in following it. It has been our purpose to enable the reader to gather a spark of this same enjoyment by the endeavor to make of him an amateur trapper. He has followed Kit Carson throughout the trapping expeditions of his earlier life. It is to be supposed that with Kit he has acquired some experience. With Kit, therefore, he shall now receive his final polishing, and if he does not in the end catch a beaver, he shall at least learn how they are caught, and all the necessary minutiae of toil which he must expect to encounter and undergo. On striking any river, when on the hunt, the trappers are accustomed to keep a bright lookout for signs, often heretofore referred to. The word signs conveys but a vague idea of its all-important meaning, as it was received by the trappers. The news of the presence of signs sent a thrill of joy through the hunters of the olden time, only equaled on board of whale ships, when the man at the lookout cries, "Thar she blows!" It rarely happens that this cunning amphibious animal can be seen moving free, either on the river banks or in the water, for nature has given him no powerful weapons with which to defend himself when surprised and attacked; but, what is better, she has endowed him with exceedingly sensitive eyesight and hearing, which enables him to detect the approach of danger in time to escape. The marks, however, which he leaves behind are, for a time, ineffaceable. These were only to be detected and used for his own purposes by the superior intellect of man. The unequaled industry of gnawing down trees and cutting twigs, peeling off the tender cuticle of the willow bushes, digging away banks, and carrying on their shovel-shaped tails the earth, together with innumerable footprints and sometimes dams, were the items which filled up the catalogue of signs on which the trapper's vision was regaled after long and dangerous tramps in search of them. These signs were not always found together, but instead they each could exist separately, and thus would arouse the hunter's suspicion of the game near by. The little twig, as it floated down the stream, half denuded of its bark, would go unheeded by the casual observer, but to the experienced trapper it was a prize to be obtained, for, by its freshness, it indicated to his mind how near he was to the chance of obtaining and adding another pound or so of valuable fur to his stock on hand. To him this small event, or one like it, as for instance a fresh footprint, with its neatly defined claw tracks as molded in the moistened earth or sand, was of a greater importance than the wonderful and striking workmanship exhibited in a dam, for the latter might be old and deserted, whereas the former was too recent to cause him to be deceived with such a sign, and in such a vicinity he hesitated not to set his trap. An idea prevails which ought to be exploded. It is boldly asserted that the beaver builds his dam for the purpose of having a nice swimming pond in the neighborhood of his residence, which is always located in the river's bank. This is not true, for in every stream which he inhabits, if this was his sole object, he could select many natural places where the water is without a ripple, and where it is both deep and broad. The animal has a wiser object in view, and it consists in providing against the pinching wants of hunger during winter, when nearly everything green has lost its sap and nutrition, and is, as a body, without blood and animation. He therefore chooses a place favorable for obtaining food, and also where his labors will be assisted by natural formations or accidents in the river's course and construction. Having pitched upon the right section to build, he sets to work with his fellows and falls giant trees. In this he again exhibits his wonderful instinct, for, while one party is cutting with their sharp teeth the hard wood of one side of the tree, another division is actively employed on the other side, never forgetting to make, like unto the woodman, the lowest incision on the side the tree is to fall, which, to suit their purposes, is always directly into and across the stream. When a tree is thus fallen, it is attacked in its branches, which are so turned and woven together in the outline of the dam as to catch in their meshes any floating material, or to receive the tail loads of soil and rubbish which they carry to it. Another and another tree are then systematically fallen and arranged as is the first, until the work is finished as completely as if it had been planned and executed by a reasoning mind. The finishing stroke is the transporting of the mud and laying it. In this labor they show themselves to be excellent masons. They now act in concert. A large gang marches into a line to the bank, where they load each other's tails, and swim with their cargoes elevated above and free from the water. When they arrive at an unfinished point of the dam, they dump the mud and mold it in place. Their houses they have previously built in the river banks. These consist of holes which lead into large and airy subterranean rooms, and which are above the water mark. In these houses they are said to sleep and live in pairs, and, if we could believe the story of the trapper related many pages back, they imitate humans in managing their household and in keeping house. The main object they have in staying the progress of the current of the river is to afford a deep place where, having fallen numbers of trees, the deep water will preserve tender and fresh the limbs and shrubs on which to subsist during not only time present, but also time to come. It is well known that fresh branches of trees and young willows, when placed in water, will keep up partial life for a considerable length of time. On this principle, the beaver acts in submerging his food deep in the water where it will retain its verdure, and where the freezing process that is going on at the surface of the river will not bar his efforts in getting at his store of provisions during the winter season. It is said that the beaver goes so far as to bundle up small branches of trees and willows which he stows away in the muddy bottom of the river. The trapper, in his wondrous yarns, insists that there are grades of society among beavers the same as among men, and he will have it that they have their head chiefs, and that often individuals among them roll in wealth, and that they have slaves who stand ready to do their master's bidding at a moment's warning. For instance, to bring them a bundle of green twigs on which to feast. According to their imaginative stories, the life of a beaver cannot be rivaled in happiness, and if we could put full credence in their descriptions of the pastimes of the animal, his palaces and luxuries, we could only compare a beaver to a citizen of Venice in her most palmy days, the difference between the two being that the former enjoyed himself more in the water than the latter did on it in his favorite gondola. The beaver, when captured young, can be sufficiently domesticated to make him a pet, but their unattractive form is anything but an ornament to the house. With young children they are very friendly, though their disposition is amiable to anyone. They are very neat in their person, and, when moved from their comrades and domiciled with human beings, nothing do they so much like as being allowed the daily privilege of taking a clean bath. When thus engaged, they are a curiosity to look at, as they are very agile and particular in removing every particle of dirt. We remember seeing one of these pets in the Mexican town of Culebro, thus enjoying himself. His owner hesitated not in taking the animal to the river, which was close by, and giving him his freedom. On finishing his ablutions, the beaver returned to where his owner was standing, without making an effort to escape, and by a look as much as said, "I am ready to return to your home." The signs having been discovered, the trappers next select a suitable location for a camp, which they soon occupy. After the pack animals are unloaded, a part of the men start out to set the traps, while the remainder busy themselves in looking after their wants, and in cooking and guarding their property, etc. The trap is very much like the same instrument used in different sections of the United States for catching foxes, wolves, etc., excepting that it is smaller, and perhaps made with more skill. Old trappers were very superstitious in regard to the makers of their traps, for they entertained the idea that much of their good or bad fortune depended on the tools they worked with. Hence they always had their favorite makers, and would pay more for their traps than for those of any other maker. This is true also with their rifles. For many years, a rifle was condemned at first sight if it did not have the name of Hawkins stamped on it, and it was not uncommon for them, when boasting of the good qualities of their riding animals, if they considered them of the maximum degree of superiority, to style them regular Hawkins horses, thereby showing how far, in this respect, their predilections grounded their opinions. The setting of the trap required expertness and experience, or else it availed nothing; for the game to be caught is, as the reader can now readily conceive, very wary, and his suspicions of there being anything wrong near at hand had to be allayed by concealing as much as possible the instrument from view. Yet it must not be far from the surface of the water, and then again it had to be firmly fixed in its position by being made fast to something that was firm, so as to prevent its being dragged off. The trapper, while thus engaged, is in the water. About his waist there is a strap to which is attached a pouch in which is carried the bait. Everything being arranged, the trap is set and the bait applied, when the man notes the place where he has been at work so as to recognize it again, and then takes his departure, to return early the following morning. The beaver, during this interim, is attracted by the peculiar scent of the bait, and, as a reward for his curiosity, he generally is caught by one of his paws, and thus falls a prey to the hunter's pleasure. The traps, when visited, are relieved of their contents and then set again. The game is put out of its misery and carried to camp, where it is skinned, and where all of the pelts recently taken are stretched out, dried, cured, and packed in small bales, whenever a sufficient quantity is obtained so to do with it. The trapper, when in full dress for an expedition, and especially after having been on one with its concomitant hairbreadth escapes, Indian and bear fights, etc., cuts to all appearances a sorrowful figure. His wardrobe is meager in the extreme, yet it answers all of his purposes, and the man would have no other. When summed up, it would be found to consist usually of 2 pairs of moccasins, 1 or 2 pair of buckskin pantaloons, 2 woolen shirts, a loose fringed buckskin coat, and an old slouched hat, usually made of some kind of skin with the fur on. His baggage, limited to a very small bundle, comprises his blankets, a buffalo robe or two, a spare hide of dressed buckskin, his extra garments above spoken of, and a little tobacco when it can be had. These, with his camp kettle and outfit of powder, lead, extra traps, scanty allowance of provisions, guns, pistols, horses, bridles, saddles, etc., make up his traveling and working kit. It may be only for a few months, or it may be for years. Footnote: These saddles and bridles are queer looking articles, but for use they could not be surpassed either for durability or comfort. Their bridle bits are the same as are used by the Mexicans. They are very powerful and intended for managing wild horses and mules, particularly the latter. With one in his mouth an animal cannot drink or feed. A Mexican only waters his horse twice a day when traveling, viz. Morning and night. With them he was ready to penetrate the loftiest mountains and unexplored regions. This is but a true picture, in a brief space, of the appearance of Kit Carson and his resources of his earlier days, the tools he had to work with, the mode of doing his labor, and the habits of the animal he diligently hunted for several years in order that his fellow man might convert into a luxury the products of his toil. Yet, had he been allowed the choice, he would not have exchanged situations with the consumer of the commodity. In the company of his boon companions, and enjoying the pure mountain air, he had often seen as happy hours as ever fell to the lot of any man. And now he was starting out on probably his last trapping expedition. The party did not return to their homes until several months had expired, and, as much of the excitement that had used to pertain to their former exploits had been worn off from the changes brought about by civilization, they decided that this, as far as they were concerned, should be their last trapping expedition. Therefore this visit to their old haunts was a sort of funeral service performed over their early adventures. On quitting each favorite river, the trappers felt that they were shaking hands with the streams and bidding them, one by one, a final good bye. Kit Carson, after disposing of his beaver, occupied himself in attending to his ranch, and was thus employed when news was brought to Mexico of the exorbitant prices which sheep were bringing in California. He made up his mind to embark in a speculation in those animals by collecting a herd and driving it to that territory. He set out for the valley of Rio Abajo, which lies to the south of Santa Fe, and there, to his satisfaction, made his purchases. In company with two friends, after employing a suitable number of shepherds, he commenced his journey and traveled northward to Fort Laramie, where he came to and followed the emigrant road that leads direct into California via Salt Lake, etc. In the month of August, 1853, after meeting with very trifling losses, as he traveled very slowly and understood thoroughly the business he was employed in, Kit Carson, with his flock of 6,500 sheep, reached the point of his destination in California, where he found no difficulty in disposing of them at the rate of $5.50 per head. The making of these long journeys with such large herds of sheep over a diversified country, sometimes abounding in water and grass, while on the other hand, and not unfrequently for many miles, the earth is barren, is a difficult task. When broad, deep, and swift rivers are to be forded, it requires dexterity and management to prevent heavy losses. The trail which Kit Carson followed to Fort Laramie is now a well beaten path. It runs almost due north from Taos, and abounds, in the proper season, in good grass and water. For about 120 miles it passes through a broken country, but when that distance is accomplished, the traveler is ushered on to the plains and keeps on them for most of the way close under the Rocky Mountains. The scenery on this route is most magnificent, and at times as grand perhaps as can be seen in any part of the world. The distance from Taos, Kit Carson's starting point, to Laramie River, is counted by hundreds of miles, and in this great tract of country there live several of the largest and most troublesome tribes of Indians in the far west. The names of these tribes are the Utahs, Apaches, Arapahoes, Cheyennes, and Sioux. A man with a large drove of sheep is so conspicuous an object that he is certain to attract their notice and bring them to him. Kit Carson, however, was well received by them and allowed to pass unmolested. They were pleased to find so formidable an enemy moving so boldly into their country and bearing the olive branch of peace. He, however, forgot not to pay them toll by presenting them with a suitable number of the sheep. In this way he prevented them from being tempted to steal from him. This is a usual custom, and the Indians expect that this sort of attention will be shown them. They do not like, at all seasons of the year, to have these herds pass through their country. Being so large, they eat up much of the grass, which assists greatly to drive away the game. We remember on one occasion that an American, in charge of several thousand sheep, started on a journey from New Mexico to California. Everything went prosperously with the man until he left the Raton Mountains and entered the country inhabited by the Arapahoes and Cheyennes. At first he was received in a friendly manner by these Indians, but was commanded by them to rest where he was until they went ahead and killed their annual amount of buffalo. This the man could not do, for the season was so far advanced that if he delayed and then attempted to make California, he would be certainly overtaken by snowstorms which would bury him and his property in the mountains. In vain he used his best endeavors to impress this state of affairs on the minds of the Indians. They would not listen to him, or sanction his going on, and threatened to punish him if he undertook to disobey them. Bidding defiance to these threats, this man started, but had only proceeded a few miles when a band of 100 squaws, mounted on horseback, overtook him and dashed into his herd, and with savage delight put to death 150 of the sheep before their owners' eyes and without his being able to stop them. The carcasses of the slaughtered animals were left to rot on the ground, thereby showing that the Indians did not stand in need of food, but that they wished to teach the intruder a lesson which he would be apt to remember. These women had been sent out by their husbands, who no doubt were close by in case their services should be needed, to show the white man the contempt they had of his power. The result was that the American was obliged to return to New Mexico from whence he came. When he set out again, he chose what is known as the southern route, which runs via the Rio Gila and strikes California in its lower section. In the Rocky Mountains the Indian women are rather small in stature, but from their constant exercise they are physically very strong. They are naturally not wanting in modesty, but, being compelled to work and even engage in war, they soon become roughened and hardened. Their dresses consist principally of deer skins, and sometimes they are very tastefully arranged. They give birth to their children with great ease, and, as they have not become martyrs to fashions or dress, they suffer but little inconvenience from this provision of nature. The children learn during their earliest years to look out for themselves, and soon become expert at it. The marriage ceremony amounts to little or nothing, and consists of a mere barter. The warrior is obliged to pay so many horses to the father for the bride. We remember on one occasion buying a superior pony from a trader, who said that he had obtained him from his Indian owner with great difficulty. The facts were as follows. This Indian was in love with a young maiden of his tribe. The young girl wished some silver ornaments, which the trader had. The only thing the warrior had to exchange for these trinkets was his prized pony. An old chief stood by with the trader and saw the warrior look and sigh at his horse. The chief gave the trader a wink, and said in a low tone of voice to him, "That man loves his horse, and he loves his affianced bride, but the bride elect will conquer. Hold on, and he will sacrifice the horse to please the girl. His love for her is the deepest feeling." Sure enough, this came true, and we never regretted that it was so. The pony proved a valuable addition to our stock of animals. End of Section 24, Chapter 15, Part 1. Recording by Denise Nordell, Modesto, California.